Hello everyone and welcome to another video. It is so great to have you back. Thank you for checking us out again. I'm here in London and my good friend Kellie is in San Diego, and we are ready to rock on USMCA for a second time in a row. So I'm really excited that you could join us here at Customs Manager. And as you know, our mission is to create the world's largest economy of empowered customs managers and global trade professionals. And we want to do this by providing professional legislative monitoring, ongoing training and education, and providing first-class support. And in this way, we hope to strengthen the customs and global trade community by creating up-to-date, well-trained, and supported customs managers and global trade professionals who are ready to grow your business effectively, efficiently, and of course, compliantly. So you can subscribe to the professional legislative monitoring updates, and it's free, and it's on www.customsmanager.org. Now, Kellie is a licensed customs broker and a U.S. attorney, and she's currently working with a large consulting company in the U.S. and is excited to be part of the Global Trade Group. She has extensive experience with free trade agreements. She managed those. She implemented these agreements in large multinational companies. And she also is the host of an amazing podcast. She's going to talk about that in a moment. Kellie, it is good to have you back. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So I just mentioned the podcast. Can you just explain us what that podcast is?
Sure. The podcast is called Women in Trade, and it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and a few other platforms. The focus of the podcast is highlighting women who are in leadership positions in the field of international trade. And the idea is to be able to express to our listeners how interesting this career is and how many different types of careers exist within the trade field.
Fantastic. We're looking forward to subscribing and listening to this. We are approaching an amazing period of time. It's the dawn of a new trade era, if you'd like, with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. And that, of course, goes live on 1 July 2020. Now, last time we met, we had the opportunity to talk about what USMCA actually is, what NAFTA is, and looked at the history of the close cooperation between North America and American countries, and you can check the link below to check out that video. Now, today, what we want to talk about is to deep dive a little bit more into the key changes that occurred in USMCA when compared to NAFTA. And maybe you can start us off with looking at what the government has said. So I'm thinking US and I'm thinking USTR, so Trade Representative. What does he say are the key achievements according to him for the US and the overall economy?
Yes, so the USTR identified 7 key achievements for the agreement, highlighting the 7 parts of the agreement that are new and advantageous for our economy. And those include intellectual property, digital trade, de minimis, financial services, currency, labor, and environment. So under intellectual property, under the intellectual property chapter of the USMCA, it's basically requiring that Mexico and Canada match the current patent rules that exist in the US. So it doesn't really affect the US as much as it affects Mexico and Canada. And so those two countries probably have to or will be seeing some changes to the intellectual property rules in order to comply with the USMCA. As far as digital trade, it is a modernization of the NAFTA agreement. The USMCA is a modernization of the NAFTA agreement, since the internet wasn't very widely used in 1994. It was up and coming technology, and now that we have a brand new economy that's very digital, the USMCA actually does address this kind of business within the updates to NAFTA. Then additionally, we have de minimis provisions that are changed within the USMCA, and that is to increase the number of shipments that enter with minimal formal entry procedures. What it does is increases the dollar value of shipments that don't require formal entry procedures. So it's saying that small shipments don't have to go through the normal entry requirements. And the idea behind this is to help small and medium-sized enterprises with, smaller commercial shipments, but it also might benefit express delivery carriers in that they can have more efficiency and expediency in making these cross-border shipments. Not to be confused, the de minimis provision is not to be confused with the de minimis provision in the Rules of Origin, which we'll get into later. The de minimis provision in the Rules of Origin allows for an increase of from 7% to 10% of foreign materials used in a product. That also changed, but in this regard, the shipment values is what was increased in this particular part of the USMCA. Financial services were addressed in the USMCA in order to facilitate a level playing field for US financial institutions. This is captured in a most favored nation treatment provision that ensures US financial service providers receive the same treatment as those providers from other countries. And it also prohibits imposition of certain restrictions that would limit the business of US financial service suppliers. So there is a little bit of impact there, generally for financial service providers. There's also a currency provision in the Macroeconomic Policies and Exchange Rate Matters chapter, and the USTR has said that this is an unprecedented aspect in the context of a free trade agreement. So it seems like we've never seen this in a free trade agreement before. And what it does is to encourage countries to refrain from competitive devaluations. And as far as Mexico and Canada are concerned, I haven't seen any sort of risk that is occurring between Mexico and Canada, but I think what the goal is to incorporate this kind of provision for future free trade agreements. So while Canada and Mexico might not have a history of competitive devaluations, the US has accused Japan and China of doing the same. So this might be kind of a flag or a notice that this is something that the US is concerned about. Then we have the environmental provisions, and the USTR is calling these the most advanced, most comprehensive, highest standard chapter on environment of any free trade agreement. So those are very intense words, but the idea is to combat trafficking in wildlife and in timber and fish, but then also address environmental issues such as air quality and marine litter in oceans and other bodies of water. And then finally, the labor provision, the USMCA does increase a lot of the regulations surrounding labor.
Yeah, I heard about the labor provision. That was really interesting. I read a report from the International Labour Organization. It was called Labor Provision in G7 trade agreements. I think it was from 2019, and it compared the trade agreements. And it was quite strong on establishing labor obligations. Do you have more details on that? What does it mean, establishing labor obligations in this agreement?
Yes. So USMCA, this is a big change from NAFTA. The USMCA does have the support of labor unions, whereas NAFTA got a lot of criticism because it didn't seem to have any teeth in this area. So under NAFTA, it was more guiding principles rather than actual requirements of labor standards to be increased. And also under NAFTA, labor issues were not subject to NAFTA dispute settlement provisions. And so that's changed under USMCA. So the USMCA does add provisions for dispute settlement under labor issues, and they enacted this rapid response labor panel to do that. The labor chapter in the USMCA mirrors the labor chapter and the commitments made by Mexico and Canada under the TPP agreement. So this is very much something that mirrors the TPP labor chapter. So we it kind of seems to be a copy and paste from that agreement. The chapter itself really focuses on labor standards such as wages and hours for workers, health and safety enforcement, transparency, elimination of forced labor, and then the chapter addresses child labor as well. So this really could force particularly Mexico labor standards to be revised within their own country, but also the labor aspect of USMCA is really affecting the automotive industry, because there is a particular rule of origin applicable to that industry that requires the use of high wage labor in the production of automobiles, and we'll continue to talk about that future presentation.
Yes, we will. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. That was very detailed and very helpful as well. It is fascinating for me how far a trade agreement has come. It has gone into so many areas: digital, as you've explained, environment, labor, and so on and so on. This is really what a modern trade agreement is all about. However, be that as it may, Kellie, the overall objective for the practical users, the companies, the exporters, the importers, and so on, is the need to lower product costs and to get to the market faster by complying with the USMCA rules. And also, of course, never forget to reduce these costs and overheads by qualifying and for these rules of origin, by managing this duty saving program. So why don't we talk a little bit about what the procedural changes are and what practical uses that there are in USMCA that have a duty impact and that may have changed under USMCA when compared to NAFTA. Because after all, it's all noble what you're saying, but what we really want, show us the way to the money. Now, you're going to do that, aren't you?
Exactly. Sounds good. Yes. So, right. So the key achievements that were listed by the USTR, in my opinion, are very, very broad, right? And so if we get more specific as to what exactly is changed procedurally to companies that are currently using NAFTA, how do they continue to recognize this duty savings that was created under NAFTA? And the good news is that the USMCA doesn't really change the duty impact of, companies that are doing cross-border trade. So that is good news. They can continue to recognize that duty savings, but what they would need to do is kind of change the procedure. And what we see as some procedural changes specifically has to do with the Certificate of Origin itself. Under NAFTA, there's a particular format that users had to submit. In USMCA, the form is eliminated, and there's a list of data points that have to be included in a claim for duty preference under USMCA. Other changes are who can create the certificate. So under NAFTA, there was a change, under NAFTA, the exporter and the producer could create the certificate. Under USMCA, it's been extended to where, with the proper knowledge, the importer can create the certificate. So that might reduce the procedural burden on users of this agreement, which is good news. Other modifications that users might see include the marking rules separate from qualification rules. So there was a requirement under NAFTA that you had to meet the marking rules requirement before you could even establish whether you could be eligible for duty-free treatment. And that seems to be decoupled under the USMCA agreement, but we are still waiting on the final implementing instructions and the uniform regulations to see what exactly that might look like. Also, there are other aspects such as specific to particular industries under the rules of origin that might change. Good news is most industries, in my opinion, a lot of the rules seem to be the same or easier to meet. Now that is an opinion, so put a little asterisk next to that. I believe that most of the rules are easier to meet with the exception of the automotive industry, which we've been talking about at length, and we will talk more about in the future. But the good news is that most of the rules of origin have been simplified and are easier to meet. So as far as effect on companies, it would be procedurally less of a burden. However, the change is always difficult.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, I hear procedural change is a little bit more on the tricky side, but I did hear the word simplified, and I did hear the word rules of origin, and the combination of the word simplify and rules of origin, that is just gold for me. So thank you for clarifying that. That's great. And I know that next time we meet, we're going to have a whole talk just about rules of origin, and that is going to be fascinating. Now, you did mention a bit of the industries that are affected by this, and I heard the word automotive. Now, I wonder if that is your conclusion, that it is the automotive industry that's most affected, or would you say there are other industries that need to pay particular attention to the procedural as well as the rule of origin, all these aspects that we were talking about in USMCA. So maybe the final question for today, because we're running out of time again. What are the industries that are affected more than others, you would say, if you had to pick?
Sure, absolutely automotive. There are a lot of complexities that are added to the claim under USMCA for automotive, but also textiles as an industry. Using free trade agreements in the textile industry is generally more difficult, and so any changes to that industry would probably pose some sort of pain points to them. So I would say automotive and textiles. The good news is that chemicals have received more attention on the rules of origin in the negotiation process, and actually have received what I think would be a relaxed rule under USMCA, and so that's good news. So I would think that the changes would be for the automotive industry, for the textile industry, and positive changes for chemicals.
Okay, great. So that was a really good overview of what has changed compared to NAFTA. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking us through the details, the official details, and more the practical details. That was a really, really great overview. Now, I know, Kellie, that you're keen to have a closing statement as regards of the things that you were discussing. So I do want to give you that moment. But just to say, thank you again for taking the time to talk us through this. Next week, next time we meet, it's going to be so exciting as we go deeper and deeper into the particularities of this agreement, USMCA Rules of Origin in more detail, and the NAFTA Certificate eliminated. So we're going to talk about that, and that's going to be great. Kellie, the final word is with you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ryan. Very happy to be here, but also the lawyer in me needs to provide a disclaimer that says, don't get all of your information from one source. Make sure that you do your own research, and I appreciate your interest in USMCA. And please check out the podcast, and you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you. Take care.